All right, and we're live. Welcome, everybody. We're the Bevry community. We've got all our links down below if you want to join in for any of these types of discussions. We also have discussions on like Friday nights just on random topics. I'm John Buck. I'm joined here with Pleasure of Doubt and also Concept Type. He's also here. And we're here to discuss John Vervaeke again. We're on, what is it, lectures 32 and 31 of his series. And I think like just this last Friday, he's released his his penultimate episode in his gigantic Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series.
So we're catching up just in time for him to end.
Yeah. I'm kind of wondering if I should like skip ahead somewhat just to see what it's all about at the very end. But I don't know if that would be like cheating.
His final episode is going to say, "This has been a massive troll. There is no meaning. Everybody go home."
That's right. Nihilism forever, right?
I've just been building this all up to show that nihilism is king, you know.
He starts like mailing bombs into people's addresses and things like that. All right. So, okay, for these two lectures, he very much got into the kind of very technical jargon, but also trying to make his case that relevance realization is very much connected to general intelligence. Like that is kind of like what his intention was behind these two lectures. And he manages to do so fairly well, at least drawing some like, okay, so two things he kind of mentioned is what is he yeah. So relevance realization is the basis for general intelligence. And then this is, I guess, sort of giving away the goat, but at the very, I have a direct quote from him that we can get into. So here's his quote, and I want to kind of gauge your guys' response to that, since I know Concept that you haven't seen the episodes, but I wanted to kind of bounce this off of you, and then we can. So relevance realization is your general intelligence. And what I'm arguing, at least that's what I'm arguing, and that your general intelligence can be understood as a dynamic developmental evolution of your sensory motor fittedness that is regulated by virtual engines that are ultimately regulated by the logistical normativity of the opponent processing between efficiency and resiliency. And that was, I guess, like his thesis for lecture 31. And yeah, maybe I should share that on screen just so that for anybody that wants.
Sure.
Yeah.
We were talking off stream that there's a lot of jargon in this episode, in these two episodes, that he's really trying to make his case and bring everything together and make this case that I think relevance realization is I think the relevance realization is intelligence, right? That they're identical.
General intelligence. So relevance realization is your general intelligence, and that your general intelligence can be understood. So his basic, like what he's trying to do here with this series is to kind of provide a secular understanding, like a scientific understanding of what it means to have general intelligence, or what it means to have relevance realization. Kind of like an explanation. It doesn't have to be a complete explanation, but at least show that it's possible or that we're on the right track. So, and part of that explanation is understanding general intelligence as a dynamic developmental evolution of your sensory motor fittedness that is regulated by virtual engines and that are ultimately regulated by the logistical normativity of the opponent processing between efficiency and resiliency. So we might have to explain each of those main ones if we want to. Let me stop sharing the screen. There we go. Oh, wait.
He really does throw in all this jargon all at once, but I think it.
Well, he explained each of these small points during the lecture, and then this is kind of his like overall thesis for the past hour. So me kind of laying it out there is definitely taking it out of the understood context. But I do know that having such highly technical terms, all being used one after the other. It does make it very easy to sort of glaze your eyes over when watching it.
Right. So I mean, what he does first, I guess, is he lays out what scientists have defined as the aspects of general intelligence. So you've got problem formulation, similarity of judgments, eduction. I'm not sure what eduction means, but eduction of latent information from experience, adaptation to unpredictable environments, and solving ill-defined problems. And then he links that to that relevance realization does the same thing, goes to each of those same things. And so he, in short, he makes the conclusion that therefore they're the same thing.
And he makes a couple of different cases for why general intelligence is directly tied to relevance realization. He makes this interesting move where by having sort of the experience of intelligence or insight that's taking place for people, and then being able to find sort of a correlation to that within like what we observe the brain doing during those things, gives us a sort of a basic way to explain that aspect of general intelligence. So like if you, what is it? Let me see, insight. Insight is the shifting of a regular network into a small world network. That was in his 30-second lecture. But yeah, and that was like what we explain as insight as part of like what it feels like to have intelligence or to solve a problem. And then his explanation for that, which we'll, I guess, get into with the differing networks.
Well, do you want to first? Should we go through that sentence? Do we want to spend some time breaking down that sentence, or?
Okay, I want to at least see if we can comprehend it, because both you and I watched the lectures, and he used all these terms all throughout it, and I think almost maybe starting backwards. Do you want me to share it on the screen again?
Sure, I have my version of it in my notes,
okay.
But yeah, you can
okay,
share
yeah,
it
I'll share it on the screen.
Watching.
Just yeah.
So like dynamic, we can go through it. So general intelligence is a dynamic developmental evolution. So he talks, it's all about feedback loops. So dynamic, I guess dynamic is changing, but development is progressing. So he describes sort of these loops of these networks which build up and then collapse, but the collapse leads to a new buildup. So like a grain of sand, a pile of sand. So the pile of sand, you drop the sand, the grains of sand each one by one. Eventually you have a mound of sand. At one point, the mound becomes unstable and collapses. But that layer can form the new basis of a new mound of sand, which can be even bigger than the last mound of sand. And there's this feedback loop of building up and then collapsing and then building up. So I think that's what he's describing there in the dynamic developmental evolution, that it's always changing, it's always progressing, it's always developing in this loop of your sensory motor fittedness. So your senses, your sensory system, and your hands, your body
acting and working within the world, picking things up, and yeah.
Right. So that by and he talks about these virtual engines. That took me a while to figure out, but I think he just means these models of virtual machines.
Well, he like at one point kind of fills up the entire board with all the different ways in which to so like there's compression of information or the particularization of information. So these are these kind of two scales. I kind of imagined it like referencing back to his lecture on Aristotle, where each virtue or like for Aristotle, there's like a virtue is the golden mean between two vices, where you can go too far in one direction and be like too cowardice by running away from everything. Or you can also go too far in the, I guess, higher for being too brave and like being foolhardy and like going after things that you aren't going to be able to tackle and handle. And so similar to that, he kind of does all these differing virtual engines in regards to cognition that you'll have. I don't know, you might have kind of some of those that were listed in your notes. I didn't bother taking any notes for this, but at least like there's all these differing like tools that I guess psychotechnologies, but maybe it's not necessarily just psychotechnologies, but at least the way in which we have cognition and how we're interacting with the world, where we're maybe we can look at some of those. I don't know if you've
we can go through. Well, he talks about a bunch of different, basically trade-offs, and loops. So here I can give there's my notes. He can get. So he talks first. He talked about being embodied and embedded. So embodied meaning that the body matters. So it's not just that we're not just a computer in a physical body. We're not just digital. That the fact that we're in a physical 3D body, I think, matters. And the embeddedness is that it says that the biological fittedness of a creature is not a property of the creature per se. It's the real relationship between the creature and the environment. So It's the body interacting with the environment. And he calls this transjective. So not objective or subjective. I got the sense he coined this term, but I don't know if he coined it or it's just in his field. But he seems to.
If it's not a real term, it's a good term, because it fuses the agent to the environment and it gives you the byproduct. It is so basically it would be true. There are things that are true that are not subjective or object. They're true because the subject and object fit in such a way. Like that space where they interact, there are certain truths there.
Mm-hmm. Like you could say that the U.S. dollar it has a greater value than, say, the English pound. Actually, I don't know if that's actually right. Pound. As being like more, I think, yeah. Okay. Well, that would be a transjective truth, I guess, because it's referring to something actually, maybe that wouldn't be a transjective.
Well, he's talking. Here's how he sort of seems to say it. So if we say it's objective in the sense that we're really making. So we're talking about relevance realization. So we're actually making something real, and it's subjective in the sense that it's coming into awareness. So this sort of loop, this feedback loop between subjectivity and objectivity, he's calling transjective.
Yeah, the way that I kind of thought of it while listening to it was sort of thinking of like the triangle of like what's necessary for a fire. Like you need to have heat, you need to have a fuel source, and you need to have oxygen. Where you cannot have fire without all three of those things. But in this particular case, in order to have transjective meaning, you have to have a subject and you have to have an object, and then some sort of interaction between those two.
Right. That it's got to go both ways, though. Like you can't have the objective realization without the subject, the subjective awareness. So you can't have one without the other. So they're intrinsically linked and they're feeding back to each other.
And that's like what he pointed out for the very term fittedness. Like for a organism to be fit is a description of its relation to its environment, really.
Right. And it's not any environment. It's not a property of the creature, because if you put it in a different environment, suddenly it's not fitted. So it's a relationship that evolves out of the environment, but to the body. So you can't have one without the other. You don't have that evolution without having both. And so that he said it's the anti-Cartesian. It's not there's no separation between mind and body. The mind and body, well, it's not that there's no separation, but the mind and body are dependent upon one another. To have the mind needs the body, and this I note is relevant. Is also, and this theme, as I was going through these lectures, I was thinking this really goes along with integrated information theory, which holds again that just a digital computer is not going to be conscious. It has to be in 3D space, so it has to be embodied in 3D space. So it's another convergence, which I sort of liked about what he's talking about here, that it seems to give some more support to. Now he may be taking it. He didn't mention integrated information theory today, but I got a big sense of it.
Yeah, and so towards the end, I think he mentions like, because while I was listening to this, I was kind of having the question like, what is his purpose for sharing this lecture? What is its utility in regards to myself, and like why is he telling us this? But he explains that his like what he's trying to do is to create a scientific account for how we have meaning making or how we have problem solving, how we're able to have general intelligence, because that's what he's connecting it to. And then from that, if we can have sort of a scientific account for general intelligence, then we can apply that to the problem of the awakening from the meaning crisis or the meaning crisis in general. But it would also have further, not really side effects, but I guess other benefits in that if we can have a scientific account for general intelligence, then this could be very helpful in our hopes in creating artificial intelligences.
Right. And he seems to be really involved in that aspect of the science. Well, a lot of these lectures was him citing his papers. So this seems to really hit at the center of what he's doing, which we have to keep in mind because, it's a bias that he has to have. So it's just something to keep in mind that, I mean, this is his work. This is his life's work here. So we should just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
So another trade-off, the next trade-off he talks about is the efficiency resiliency trade-off, which he's talked a lot about in previous lectures. And that what we want is a way to optimize efficiency and resiliency. So efficiency is, how well something can work. But resiliency is how much it's subject to, to noise in the system or to something coming and disrupting the system.
Yeah. This is something that's really looked at in mechanical systems. If you build something that is with a very high tolerance, so that it basically removes any of the vibration or anything else, you end up with the very large possibility of things causing it problems. Like a little bit of dirt here will just completely throw that all off because everything's too tight fitting. Like there's that whole exchange is very important in all kinds of areas. We can see it in other areas it has nothing to do with. I mean, that isn't exactly the same when we think about rigidness versus flexibility. If you have something that's really strong, well, then if it has to flex, then it's going to break. If it's too flexible, then it won't be strong enough to accomplish its job. You have to have it strong enough and flexible enough to deal with the system and potential forces that will be involved.
Right, and that's exactly what he talks about. He talks about two types of general machines: a general purpose machine and a special purpose machine. So a general purpose machine is example your hands. It can do a lot of stuff, but it's jack of all trades but master of none. Oh, my internet. Let me know if my internet connection looks like I'm having trouble. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Yep. All right. And then a special purpose machine would be like would be like a hammer, which does some jobs really well but doesn't do great at other jobs. And you need this back and to be adaptive, to be a problem solver. You need to have a back and forth between these two types of machines in a dynamic way.
Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, yeah. I guess we could go into each of his like technical points regarding like what are the virtual engines that for cognition that are out there. I don't know if it's really necessary, but it is interesting nonetheless. But I guess people could probably just go to see that.
It's worth people look up, because it's interesting of giving a language, a grammar to thinking about these things. Like when he talks, you're like, oh, that makes sense. And so a lot of things that you may have thought about before, just not in that way. Actually, concept, you probably have more. I think you have more background, I think, in information theory and whatnot. So you may.
For what now? Sorry,
information theory. So you talked about like data compression, application, particularization, and scope.
But I know you had a question, since like besides getting a I guess scientific understanding of human cognition, he also pointed out that he's also attempting to sort of build a secular understanding for meaning, as well as like how it is, how it is that people can have these sort of transcendent experiences. So like directly tying it into the spiritual experiences, so that like if we can sort of build a secular account for spirituality, then that would be very helpful for us in dealing with the meaning crisis. It seems like what his point is he's trying to get across.
Right, and he goes even stronger than secular. He says a naturalistic theory of relevance realization. So I guess the question I had for, I think I'm a non-theist, and you two, I believe, are both theists. But so the question is, do you buy his natural theory? Now, just to be fair to him, he is not making an absolute argument. He's very clear that his arguments are suggestive. He thinks this is plausible. He doesn't think it's done. The science he's talking about is science. A lot of it's going on right now.
I was surprised by that. Like he was referencing a paper just from like 2 years ago, or maybe it wasn't that early, but it was very much sort of cutting edge science that he was using to support his argument. So he's like very well informed on the literature. But yeah, and just like you were saying, he's not looking to prove that this is the case, but he is trying to sort of provide a naturalistic account for this. Doesn't mean that it is, but at least that there is this explanation to be looked at, right, and thought about. So yeah. So as for me, I guess in like I don't know. I guess I'm supportive of it because I don't know. I find it interesting. I usually find all the different like theories of consciousness that are out there pretty interesting, and how they kind of dialogue and interplay against each other. Since there's quite a few, and I'm wondering where this will sort of fit in it of some of the previous sort of or attempts at providing a scientific account for consciousness, or if it would be sort of its own thing going forward. As you said, it might fit well with the IIT theory of consciousness, though.
What's IIT?
IIT is integrated information theory, which I'm not an expert on it, but I'm partial to it, which basically says that consciousness is a fundamental property similar to mass and velocity that manifests when information is integrated. So a lot of what he's talking about, these feedback loops, and a lot of what he was talking about in these lectures of the different that he talks about different types of networks. So regular networks, which are the most efficient, random networks, which have a mix of long distance and short distance, which are the most resilient. And then, but the most sort of the optimal networks are these small world networks, which are, which are basically mainly have short connections, but then have a few cross long distance connections, which makes the most efficiency or optimization between efficiency and resiliency. So the areas of the brain that are sort of linked to consciousness and intelligence and relevance and salience have the nature, from what they can tell, these small world networks, which is, again, I think what integrated information theory would predict, because those are the most integrated networks as well. So Yeah, so that's that. I mean, that's the yes. So I mean, integrated information theory would also hold it's not just brains, which would be conscious necessarily. Like for example, a photodiode would have what they call phi, a small amount of integrated information, and therefore should have a small amount of consciousness. Probably wouldn't be anything like ours, but it may be that there's something like it feels like to be a photodiode, and the brains are particularly good integrated information systems. And what he talked about in terms of oneness, the oneness of the conscious experience and the oneness of the realization and the intelligence experience, is also what integrated information says about consciousness. That when the system is integrated, it comes irreducibly as a one, a single experience, even though it's made up of a bunch of parts. It presents as a unified experience. So all of what he was saying today, from my non-expert understanding of IIT, is that it sort of fits together.
Okay.
But so then the question is, though, an interesting question is, so if but do either of you have an objection, I guess, on a theistic sort of aspect to, presumably you don't believe at its base there is a naturalistic explanation, that you believe it.
Well, I can't disagree that there is, because people who are not subjected to a religion are still going to have some kind of system that looks for meaning in things, because otherwise why would you do anything at all? Like you just be eating, sleeping, restroom, it's like, why? At that point you'd be like, why am I doing this? And yeah. even that question right there, why, basically is saying, well, I would like to have a reason for why I'm doing this. So I don't think you can really escape the why, because you are doing an action and you want to know what the reason is you're doing the action.
Right. So that's kind of a fair point. Like within explanations that science will give us is always of how rather than of why. And so like you can give a scientific account for what it feels, how a spiritual experience happens naturalistically. But for the individual experiencing that spirituality, there will be some sort of great why-ness to it, like some sort of great value to it. So is that, I don't know exactly what you're meaning there.
So when a child asks why, they are asking one of two things. They are actually asking why, or they're asking how. And the reason for this is that why covers both why and how, because how is just by what method, like by what means is this going on. But why is for what reason. So if you're saying for what reason, you could be asking about by what method, because by what method is a subsection of for what reason, right? So when you're asking why, it's vaguer, but a lot of times the connotation on why, at least as an adult, ends up being, is there some kind of intentionality? Is there some kind of purpose that was, that this thing is happening for? It's not just here's a cause, here's an effect, but is there a purpose for the effect, for the cause?
Is there a justification too?
Yeah,
that's something else that would be lost from a how explanation.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, okay, so why do you eat? So you don't die. What, but why don't you die because you eat? Oh, because of this digestion thing. Okay, well, why does this digestion thing work? So you just dig all the way down to the bottom, and then at that point you have to return to, well, why not die? Like why do we keep ourselves alive? Is there a reason to do this? And that's gets down into the whole meaning. Like, is there a meaning? Is there a purpose to.
No, I think what he's talking about is more how we generate meaning.
No,
How
I understand. I understand that, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that, you know, we have to generate meaning at some point, at least to some degree. Now, some people don't really care a whole lot. I've met those people that are like very, very agnostic. I say, don't you want to know why you're alive? Like what the purpose of all of this is? He's like, no, I just enjoy my life and that's all I care. So like his meaning is just enjoying life, right? That's the minimal amount. It's just because I would like to.
Yeah. But in terms of, can we explain how we like okay? So as I understand it, a lot of theists will take these altered consciousness experience, these altered states of consciousness, as evidence of there being a god or being a spiritual realm, and that these experiences can form a core of why they believe, because they've had some experience they can't explain, which provides all the things that Vervaeke has talked about: transcendence, insights, a fundamental change in their agent arena relationship, and that they will say, well, this can only be explained by a god, or the fact even that we're conscious can only be explained by a god. So that I guess what I'm asking is, what would there be any implication if he's successful, and he admits he's not there yet, but if his attempt is successful, that we have a very plausible, well-fitted, scientific, naturalistic account of intelligence, relevance, realization, consciousness, would that have an impact on beliefs on God, or would it just be that would be the way God produced this?
Well, yeah. So that's the thing, is people just push back. They just move the post back further. So, this is pretty much what's been done through all of history when it comes to religions, is they say, oh, God does all of this stuff, right? And then they were like, no, this is just science. This is just the way things are, like, causally, right? And they're like, oh, well, that causal system is because God. So they just move it back a step, right?
I would say it would sort of like there's two ways in which it would be in order for Vervaeke to sort of succeed with his project. One in which would be sort of the secular account of how we have meaning, how we have the experiences of spirituality or transcendence, things like that. The other would be providing a psychological account in which people can still get meaning without the philosophical underpinnings from those experiences. So if he can provide an explanation for, oh, this person had a born again experience 20 years ago or something like that, and then explain it all naturalistically, but at the same time be able to explain why that experience was still important and necessary for them without having to rely upon any sort of theistic source to that person, like being able to explain, okay, what you perceive to be God reaching down and kind of shaking you or something like that wasn't actually God. It was actually, say, the underpinnings to your limbic system or something like that. And that's a good thing, because you want your limbic system to be in control of you. It's telling you that you're going to die if you keep going down this pathway, and this is what you need to do in order to not die. And so there would be sort of like two, I guess, tests to see how competent his overall thesis will be, according to those two sort of things. And I think maybe even the former wouldn't be as necessary to provide a secular framework for meaning. Because like you said, like he said before, it's not like he's proving it exactly. He's just trying to provide at least a potential explanation that would fit within a secular framing.
Well, I think what it does give is, I get this a lot. I mean, where theists say, how without God there is no meaning, and I think what he does make a strong case for is whether or not you believe in God, there is a strong case for meaning. That regardless of where you think these altered states of consciousness come from, or
sure, yeah, there is an experience of meaning nonetheless. It's exactly kind of like what Concept Hut was saying, though, is this experience of meaning justified? And does his system provide a method of justification for the meaning that is experienced?
Well, remember, he's being very careful not to provide answers. He's setting up the system. So he's not saying, like, he's never saying when you have an insight, it must be correct.
Right.
But he's trying to explain how we have insights and then how to fit those insights in with the rest of our cognitive systems. It seems that there are very real, measurable, like, all these experiences people talk about are real. Like, they're real, and they have very real effects that are beyond just because you believe in God. That they go deeper into how we're built, for why we have these, for why these experiences affect us in this way, and that engaging in practices to help have more of these experiences can have very positive effects, again, regardless of whether there's a God. Which I guess some theists would I suspect not like that, because it gives sort of like evolution. Well, evolution doesn't prove there's no God. It provides, the theory of evolution provides non-believers with a plausible explanation for how life
how things can look
without God.
Yeah, how we can have things that looked like they were designed without having been designed, just going through a process of natural selection.
So I would have to think this hypothesis, if it bears out, would have a similar effect to evolution in providing some comfort to non-theists in these hard problems of we have to figure, how does all this work, and the mystery of the hard problem of consciousness, and what he see. I do hear, I hear regularly, there's been no progress in figuring out consciousness or figuring out this kind of stuff. Now, he seems to be making a strong argument that people who are keyed into the literature know that there has been progress in understanding all this stuff. And so it does sort of, I guess it interplays with those arguments. Now, I'm not saying you guys have made those arguments. I'm saying these are arguments that I've heard outside.
And honestly, I'd probably be most interested in seeing how his arguments could provide some sort of like framework in which to make tests within robotics and artificial intelligence to see, like, to actually kind of put his theories into practice. And it seems like he has connections with people in the artificial intelligence community. So it may be that he's already sort of been doing a lot of that with them.
Well, see, I wonder with 3D printing, I suspect, like, to get a conscious AI, it's going to have to be embodied. So I'm wondering if they'll get to the point where they can literally 3D print a human being.
It doesn't have to be outside the computer. It just has to have an idea of the same properties that exist in reality.
Well, no, but if integrated information theory is correct, it may have to be outside the computer. Digital isn't going to do it.
How this works? So basically, there's this thing called the symbol grounding problem, and it's why AI has such a hard time, because we haven't really encoded this into AI yet. And it's basically the idea at the very bottom of our language, there are things that connect directly into our understanding of reality, like colors. You can't really explain a color to a blind person. It's just ridiculous. The idea of positive and negative, the idea of motion. Some of these things necessarily require sensory experience. You need to be able to sense some of these things to build the relationships up from there. When you do that, then you can build ideas on top of that by combining these different ideas together. This is sort of what we do with children. We teach them colors, we teach them shapes, we teach them very basic ideas. And you can do this inside a 3D environment. So you can basically give the entity a 3D body in a 3D environment. And it can then gain that information from there. Or you could take a data set that has been built from that and give it to one that didn't experience one yet. Because essentially at that point, what you'd be doing is like somebody that had sight, had hands, had been moving around, and then you blinded them, deafened them, and cut off their arms and basically put them in a chair. Like they're now not able to do anything. They're not able to sense anything, but they still have the ideas, the data in their head. They still have these relationships understood. So they can still move those relationships of environmental properties around in their head. So you can do that. You don't need a body, at least not a physical body. You just need a body, virtual or physical, to gain those environmental properties.
Well, there's certain arguments laid out by John Searle that if you just information processing isn't enough to provide a foundation for consciousness to kind of spring forward. Like he has the Chinese box argument where if you're locked inside of a box and given this sort of book of translations, where if you're given a sheet of paper with these certain Chinese characters, you'll look to the book and see, okay, if I'm given this sheet of characters, I should respond with this drawing of these other Chinese characters as an output. And you can do that all day just by resorting to the book and then spitting out the output, all without having any sort of understanding of what the meaning is behind these Chinese characters. Like, for all you know, they're just...
Yes, I've heard the experiment. That's why I'm...
It's a thought experiment. But
yes, yeah. I know. That's exactly what I'm trying to say, is the symbol grounding problem is what that Chinese room problem is all about, is meaning. So that symbol grounding problem is all about, what do ideas mean?
Okay, and you're kind of pointing when you were talking about how we teach children colors, I was thinking it's not necessarily that we're teaching them, it's that we're giving them a word to associate with the color of our experience. So they'll see a red thing, and then we'll teach them this means red. And if we're French, we'll say this is rosa, or Spanish, rojo.
Yeah.
We associate a syntactical word in association with this object of our experience.
With sensory data, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know. If the computer itself is only working off of syntactical words like RED or ROHO or ROSE, then it's not going to have any sort of senses to associate with that thing. All it will have is other syntactical things. So the letters RED in association with this pixel of a certain numerical value, like the color of the pixel. And then that's the only association that's really being made there. But that's not a association between our sense experience and a syntactical message, or just like a symbolic message. It's just a association between two symbolic messages.
Right. That's why that's what I was saying is you can't explain something without something to explain it with. So you have to start with environmental sensory data, and we already have a lot of ways to accomplish that right now. Like, one of the things that we do right now with AI is we train it to perceive that a pattern of pixels, various colors in a space, is equal to some kind of idea, like a llama or a cat. Now, it does it very poorly, but it does it effectively enough to like vision recognition. And so that's essentially what you're doing is sensory data equals this tag.
But one thing that computer probably doesn't have is the quality experience. I posted in the side chat a link to a paper which I read a long time ago, and I'm not sure I fully understood it, and I know I haven't. But from what I gathered, it's the qualia aspect that they believe requires the 3D space. That the 3D space will have plays an important role there. I wish I was technical enough, or really I need to sit down with it to really understand it in depth.
Yeah. So I've been listening to some of the lectures from Tononi on IIT, and it seems like both from him and I haven't gotten a full enough grasp on it yet. But it seems like he's saying that all matter has the potential to be conscious. All it really requires is some sort of the proper arrangement of it so that this consciousness can be, I guess, manifested in some way. Okay,
that's what I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and
and those feedback loops and the areas that John Vervaeke was talking about, from my limited take with a grain of salt understanding, really fits in well with the way IIT is seeing it. And now I imagine these guys probably have influenced his views as well. So it's probably not a coincidence that part of the information, part of the science that he's saying converges on this is probably IIT. When he brought it up, he seemed to like it, though he didn't talk much about it.
Okay, so is it then that if a photodiode has a certain amount of what it feels like to be a photodiode, and there's other components to a computer that maybe does have a small amount of integrated information, but the things that are happening on the computer, in the memory that's going on, wouldn't be connected to the actual hardware itself. And so there wouldn't be a sense experience for the simulated mind. There would only be the sense experience for what something is actually built within physical space.
It's probably something like that. My understanding is that the way our computers are, according to the theory of IAT, it would not constitute phi, which is their concept of integrated, their formula for integrated information. That the photodiode would have a small amount of phi, 1 bit of phi, or however it is, a very small amount of phi. But a digital computer would not have phi. That you need that. And again, I mean, concept, you can probably understand these papers a lot better than.
Well, I haven't read them, but I've talked to a lot of people about AI and the consciousness thing. So I want to bring up something related to this. Mm-hmm. The idea of feeling, the idea of do you feel good or do you feel bad? The idea of pleasure or pain. These ideas right there. When there are particular people who gain a pleasurable feeling, the sensation of pleasure from something that is actually detrimental to them, like being beat or cut, or shamed, or something else that is normally perceived and felt as pain or discomfort. Mm-hmm. They feel it as the inverse. Now, the thing about that is just that sensory data is triggering the opposite release of chemistry that causes your brain to then pick up and say, hey, this is a good thing, this is a bad thing in this degree. Now, so at the end of that feeling is just a way to display that data to your mind. But in the end, feeling is just that. It's just data. So it doesn't really, there's a lot of people feel there's some kind of magical thing going on there, but it's not. It's just pulses of electricity in your brain. So it doesn't, so a computer could do that. a computer could feel pleasure or pain if we can, because it's just pulses.
Well, you know what? I'd be interested, like if and I can give you some links later, but if you could look up, because I don't have the technical, but I'm completely autodidactic and badly so with my scientific training. But I think you're engineering, or which you're.
Yeah, mech engineering, but
So you will be able to understand these papers, I think, in a much deeper way than I ever could. So I think you'd be interested to read some of these IAT papers, and maybe then you could tell me what you think. I mean, again, I'm going by the, when they describe their theories, so I'm taking the big picture explanations. But I when I read the papers, I look at the diagrams. I haven't spent the time to really grasp what the nuances there.
Sure.
But now IAT, I like IAT to the sense that, from what I understand, it has some early, experimental results. The more we learn in terms of the areas of the brain that are associated with consciousness, from what we can tell, it seems that those are the areas that are the most integrated. So a lot of the evidence, again, seems to be converging towards that at least IAT is onto something. That they're on the right track in figuring out how consciousness works. But I don't think anyone has said, it's a done. No one said for any of these theories that it's a done deal. These are all saying, we there's some interesting aspects here. And unfortunately, the math, talk about combinatorially explosive. Like, we don't have the capacity today to map out 5 for a brain. It's from what I understand, the number of connections is just too huge. The most they can do is a very small system at this stage. I mean, maybe once we get quantum computers, maybe IAT will have a big jump in really testing their theories, because we just don't have the processing power to test it fully right now. But there's a lot of experiments that apparently at least are in line with it. So it's really interesting.
But, and that was something that interested me in his 30-second lecture. In there he brought up something that was actually, like, we have a certain amount of support for sort of his thesis that there's a connection between general intelligence and the sort of like virtual engines understanding of cognition, or tied to relevance realization. I guess there. So I guess they did some tests between, like, if you put some kids in a brain scan and test the flexibility of their, the self-organizing criticality, where the neurons are firing in sync and then out of sync and then in sync again. It's almost like this is like sort of like a refresh rate or something for the brain, where it's like taking things in, I guess, in a broad perspective, then in a very condensed perspective, and then back and forth. And then you can kind of get a, I guess, shaping of the world by doing this. And then, like, you do this multiple times, and then the highways, the neural networks that fit within both of those sort of like cement somewhat, and then you can kind of make it so that they're more relied upon for other situations for those types of things. I'm explaining it quite poorly, and it seems like I don't know how better to explain it exactly, but it was at least interesting, because he brought up there were tests that, like, you can do general cognition tests on children, and then analyze sort of how, it's not so much that, like, how knowledgeable they are, but how proficient they are at multiple different fields of studies. And then you can kind of get an idea that, okay, they have a general intelligence to where they can learn and then kind of even new things and build up from there. Like, they're able to learn new things fairly easily enough. And there was a correlation. It may be a weak one, but at least there was a correlation between the brain scans that they had, where they had that flexible self-organizing criticality, and their proficiency in being able to have general intelligence and learning.
And the interesting thing he finds is that these patterns, these cycles, are going on at various levels throughout the brain. So right up, right down. And which is why I think he's saying this evidence is converging into this area, we see these same patterns occurring over and over again.
Yeah, and I found it quite interesting. I want to pay more attention to it if he brings it up even further, but connecting the phenomenological experience of problem solving and intelligence and relevance realization to the like neuroscientific explanations that we have here, and being able to kind of connect those between the two. So like if you can see this behavior of the brain, the brain pattern that occurs, and then have the phenomenological experience of like undergoing an insight, and then being able to connect those two, then I think that would be a strong basis he would have for supporting his sort of naturalistic theory of meaning making.
Yeah, he described a really interesting experiment by Stephen and Dixon, who he said found a way to measure how much entropy is being processed in the brain while trying to solve an insight problem. And that they found that entropy goes down, so the behavior in their brain became more organized right before an insight. So that when people have an insight, so when you have an insight, the information is organized like a regular network, and then suddenly a long distance connection forms. So you lose some resiliency, but you gain a massive spike in efficiency. And that this is what they seem to have measured right when people are having an insight. Mm-hmm. And so that it's sort of an optimization of a small world network. That's what's going on when you're having an insight. So this is what brings in this whole project, that this is why insight and things that can lead to insight are so important, because he thinks it's so key to all of this relevance realization, and that it all just works together. He says what happens in insight is I get an SOC where you break up the regular network, converts it into a small, a short, mixing up a small world network. Then you have a sudden enhancement, increased optimization of relevance realization, accompanied by a flash of salience. So he's
right.
So it all fits together. Is what he's
and that was interesting. That's like my final point from his lecture was how there is a sort of necessary connection of salience to problem solving. Like you have to feel like there's a reason for why you're performing this problem solving. There has to be some sort of like value laden connection between what you're doing and being able to do it. Like his direct quote is, relevance realization is not cold calculation. It is always about how you how your body is making risky, affect-laden choices about what to do with its precious but limited cognitive and right metabolic. I'm working out the transcript, so some of these words might not be proper. Metabolic and temporal resources. But yeah, like you're within a set of circumstances in which you can't spend a whole year thinking about a problem. You have to do it within a small amount of time, and it has to be something worth putting that small amount of time into, because it takes up a lot of calories to work on a problem. I think like they did a test of like how many calories these chess masters burned, and it was like exactly the same as if you were like on a standing bike for like 30 minutes or something like that. But it's so funny, just like they're just sitting.
So clearly I'm still. Not thinking enough. That I'm eating way too much. But
yeah, but it is interesting to kind of see the connections between like there has to be like a directly salient connection between what we're working on, what we're trying to solve, and ourselves, really. And I think that might even be a key to being able to get yourself to do things that you know are important, is by putting greater investments into that thing so that you have to solve it in order to not like lose all these other existential problems. Like I know for myself, sometimes I'll like if I need to get something done, I'll post about it on Twitter. And then that kind of like gives me the swift kick in the butt I need in order to actually get the thing done. Because I know otherwise I'll just sort of leave it in the back burner and then not. But now that I've kind of put it out there, I have the potential to be socially shamed for not doing so.
But yeah, I mean, all these lectures, these last few lectures, I mean, the 5 are really, I think, where he's just focusing on the scientific background for what he really wants to get to, which I think is what he's coming up to next, where I think he's getting back to the philosophy, to the psychotechnologies, he really wants to make his case for why you should care about all the rest of the stuff that he wants to. I think like I guess the religious people are already convinced about the psychotechnologies, or some are, meditation or whatnot, and altered states of consciousness. He wants to convince, I think, the secular people why we should care about these altered states of consciousness and spirituality. And he wants to convince the religious people that modern religions have lost a lot of what made religion good, and that there are secular ways. Just because you're secular doesn't mean you don't have meaning, and doesn't mean that it's not just. He really doesn't want people to think he's just saying it's just neurons.
Right.
It's much more complicated than that. It's much deeper than it's just neurons.
And I think that's like, if I was to lay a critique to his project, would be the worry that his project, like the byproduct of his project, would be used to sort of make that case. Like, oh, we don't need God to explain any of this. We can explain it because it's just neurons, or something like that. Where by having a scientific account for meaning, it strips it of the actual meaning behind it, which I don't think he's going to be doing at all, because he seems to be trying to connect salience directly towards all of this. And so that I don't think you can have a scientific account of meaning, at least so far from what he's doing, without that value ladenness within it. But he's just connecting it to probably like our evolutionarily necessary value ladenness of fittedness to our environment.
And he's suggesting that secular people can have a deep sense of meaning, but they have to work at it. And that one thing religions have done really well is have a whole mechanism of meaning making, and that people do without even realizing that's what they're doing, and that the secular society has gotten away from that. I think the theists who have the most problem with it are saying, well, okay, yes, but they're going to go to hell, or they're going to have, depending on what religion they have. But if they think there's a consequence for not believing, I don't think those theists are going to be satisfied by what he's saying. But anyone who sort of less, but those theists, I think, who are less focused on that aspect are probably going to, I think, be much more, I think what you can say is that theists and non-theists can live together and experience meaning together, with even having different worldviews. We have
Flying Voxel Noland saying, you should change the title to the video, 2 men talk about stuff while a third plays Halo. Concept Head, are you not paying attention to our deep intellectual discussion here?
Actually, Concept left to get something to eat, but he'll be back in a second.
Yeah,
that's funny.
Yeah,
thanks for stopping by, Flying.
That'd be interesting if that. I don't know if that's exactly the intention behind his of his project, but I do think that there is he has mentioned similar things to that in his like other interviews, where like he's not trying to get rid of religion. If somebody has a religion that is their meaning making system, then that's great. He's not trying to like get them out of that. But he's just trying to sort of provide his own system for the other people that to where religion has kind of not worked for them. And for all the other people that are wanting maybe something with a greater scientific backing behind it.
Yeah, like I'm probably putting my own filter on that. That's my sort of one of the things that I want is to reconcile things between theists and non-theists, and to
That's
show
a good
that
goal.
we're often more similar. That we're I don't think there's anything we can do about the thing like, okay, you're damned if you don't believe this, but I think we can show at least in almost every other way we can live and work together. That we're much more similar than we are different, even though there may be some theological.
The differences is what really matters to people, though. We already know we're similar, but people always look for the thing that's
right. Well, that's the thing. They don't pay attention. It's that the differences become more salient. They stand out more. But my argument is we should pay more attention to what we have in common, because we have far more in common than we think. The differences fool us into thinking we're so different when really we can be similar on 90% of the things, and we just differ on the last few.
I wonder if the differences and the similarities depend upon, I don't know, maybe I'm just taking a Marxist reading, dialectic materialism, where it's dependent upon the resources for, or the competition for resources. So that if you're in an environment where a lot of the people are going after the same resources, then any differences that you might have between opinions or theological beliefs will become more salient. And then you'll have to codify according to those specific beliefs so that you're working together to achieve those goals, while the other people will have to.
But do we have
I don't think
a scarcity in that way? Or is it just, do we just seem to think we have scarcity in that way? I think my point is there's enough for all of us. We can, we don't have to fight over those resources. At least not today. There may have been a time where that was true, but in modern Western society, I think we've solved that problem.
There's a thing that I saw PragerU did a video, and
if it's PragerU, it must be solid. So
hey, hold up. It was something called the broken tile syndrome or missing tile syndrome. I can't remember which, but it's really good concept that I think really nails this point home. It's this idea of, hey, we have all of these tiles that are good and solid and are there, but hey, there's one missing. I want to fix it. So we're always looking at the stuff that is not perfect. We're always looking to advance something, right? So hey, you have a job that pays $100,000. Well, that's not enough. Oh, you're making $200,000 now? Oh, that's not enough. It's you always want to do better than your current position. It doesn't matter what it is. You have a great wife. Well, maybe she doesn't have this other quality that you would like. Okay, well, now you found a wife that has that quality too.
The grass is greener on the other side.
We always are pushing things forward in terms of our interests. We want perfection. We don't like things that are missing or we feel are missing that we could have not missing. So we're come so far in our society that now we're not worried about as many of these really important things like being at war all the time. And now we're just picking on people for little things. But
I think it goes beyond that, because as Vervaeke has shown, I know you haven't watched a lot of these videos yet, but we really have in modern Western society gotten away from a lot of the meaning-making mechanisms, those psychotechnologies that he talks about, which help generate meaning. So there is a real fear from certain religious people that the secularization has gotten away from meaning, and that's legitimate. I think we can recognize that. I think by focusing on secular type of meaning, we can bring things back closer together. We can say, hey, yes, we recognize, yes, we overcorrected. We went a little bit too far away from, we threw out the baby with the bathwater. We dropped some of the theological stuff, but maybe we shouldn't have dropped some of the ritualistic, meditation, I put prayer and meditation together. I think prayer is a type of meditation. We dropped a lot of the good stuff of religion along with the bad stuff, and maybe there's a meeting of the ways where we could go a little bit closer back towards spirituality in a sort of a secular spirituality, and that may make, a lot of theists are very afraid of non-theists because they can't conceive of them having meaning in their lives. And
we just think you're broken. That's all.
Well, I mean that too, but somebody who's broken is terrifying. Like a psychopath, someone who's psychotic.
Oh, not that kind of broken. No, I mean like, hey, we believe you living in a delusional state. We would like you to not live in a delusional state. That's basically how everyone looks at everyone. It's like,
no, but I think it's more than that. Like they think it leads to murder and nihilism and debauchery and all these whatever they think that are negative things.
That's different, I think, though. That's not really meaning. It's like, that's just tangential. I mean,
well, no, I think they see it as a symptom of not having meaning, going down. Now I don't agree with them on what is bad or good, but I mean that's a different question. But what I'm saying is, I think there is a legitimate concern that modern Western society has gotten away from meaning-making machinery, and having a secular push towards it, I think, can only help relations between theists and non-theists.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's just that everybody is still gonna like disagree to some degrees, but I
sure.
It seems,
but it's a bias, right? And part of good cognition is trying to identify biases. Part of rationality. Part of being rational is identifying our biases and trying to correct for them. So if we're biased in favor of differences, well, that means we should pay more attention to where we're similar.
But that's the thing, though, is that we look for the things that are broken or different because we want to make things perfect. That's the ultimate goal. And so what I'm trying to say here is that, for instance, let's take some of the bigger things that society is sort of funky on right now. Let's say everyone all of a sudden agreed on, hey, families are good to have, staying together is good to have when you're in a relationship. Don't leave because you're bored. Like, basically have solid marriages, solid families. Hey, we should all like love each other and help out the homeless. Let's help our vets. Let's say we've solved these problems. We put in the healthcare. Guess what? People are still going to find something to bicker about. They're just going to be like, all right,
but that's not being rational necessarily. Right, because
it's perfectly rational to say what's next.
Well, no, but hold on, because there's the other side of it. You should ask the question, okay, where do we differ and can we resolve it? But then you can ask, okay, where do we agree? And we may want to work on our differences, but is the situation as bad as we thought? Is the situation such a crisis that we should hate these people or consider them the enemy, consider them the other? Or should we see them, they're different, they're actually kind of similar to us with a few differences? It's just a change in, by asking that question, you can start to see the other side is more like us.
I don't know, man. It's look, people get heated over, hey, you don't like to eat the same food I do. You don't have the same diet I do. Like there's something wrong with you. Like,
right, but let me ask you, let's take that exact example. If in the next breath you said, okay, but now let's think about all the foods we do like together. Do you think that would affect how they felt about their initial distaste?
Nope.
Or you don't think that'll have any effect?
No.
On the initial distaste?
No. Because the thing is that people look at the things that are different and say, okay, well, why do I believe this thing? Because it's reasonable. And if they believe this other thing, they have to be very unreasonable. So they're taking that route of, hey, they're
right. But that's my whole point. Then they may think, you know what? Hey, they're not so unreasonable. And that can bring them closer together. My point is, I don't think they do focus on the similarities. I think they focused primarily on these differences. I mean, how wars have been fought over these tiny differences in theological positions, between, different versions of Christianity, for example, whereas if they were focusing on, hey, we all have very similar beliefs here, those wars may not have happened. I mean, I think it's I'm not saying we don't focus on those differences. I'm saying we should focus more as well on the similarities, and that may reduce the level of emotion, negative emotion.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, it seems more likely to be like these differences or emphasis upon our differences are likely due to at least a perception of competition for resources, whether those resources are members of a church or jobs in order to provide food for your family.
Well, so for example, like Vervaeke's positions could be a threat to churches. Some people you could predict if his religion that's not a religion takes off, you can predict at least some people who are currently going to church will leave the church and follow that. So,
sure. I mean, that's a big thing with a lot of different areas of life. Like, hey, don't tell my kids about veganism because I don't want them believing that nonsense.
Because then I can't go to McDonald's anymore when I'm eating out with them.
Or hey, don't tell my kids this Hitler shit. I don't want a bunch of little Hitlers running around. Like don't tell my kids that drinking is fun because I don't want a bunch of little drunks. You try to protect people from things you believe is incorrect.
Negative.
For instance, let's say that next week John Buck comes to us, me and you, Pod, and says, hey, I don't know, I don't know about this whole like globe Earth thing. I sort of think the flat earthers have a point. Me and Pod might be like, hey, this is bad. Like, you should not be listening to these flat earthers. They're crazy. This is bad for you. And then you'd be like, well, I think you're just, you just
you fell for it.
Yeah, you fell for it. You're on the other side. I can't be friends with you because you won't listen to reason. It's like it goes all over the place.
Yeah, but I don't know if it's just that like we have this innate desire for everyone that we interact with to think the same way we do. I think that
you must agree with me.
That's all right. You can think that. I don't care.
And Flying Voxel, he said people who never need to struggle to achieve improvement end in a place where they stop seeking it. I'm not sure if I'm suggesting we should reconcile. I'm not saying that there isn't going to be still strife. I think we can work to reduce strife. I'm not anticipating any kind of utopia where we just end up in a
hold hands,
everyone
sing kumbaya.
Exactly. So I get that. I think there's always going to be more than enough struggle, and the fact is we have more than enough struggle that maybe we don't need to hate each other because we believe slightly different things.
Yeah.
I think I know exactly what I'm getting you two for Christmas. It's a big old package of struggle.
I need some more of that, actually. Wait. Are you going to send me a book titled My Struggle?
No.
Send you 2 pounds of struggle. You can eat it. It tastes terrible, but,
Yeah. Flying Voxel also says affluenza is an example without the context of struggling to achieve. They give up on an improvement.
I think it means affluence.
Oh, okay. It's an example without the context of. Okay. So by living in affluence, they give up on trying to improve themselves because there is no without having some sort of struggle to work to. Like I think I'm understanding it. Like if you're born into an affluent household or something like that, then you won't be able to, or you won't be seeking for self-improvement because it wouldn't be there for you.
a simple
Or you wouldn't feel
the requirement wouldn't be there for you. Yeah.
This is a simpler example. A lot of people are really familiar with pretty people. Pretty people don't really have to be very socially capable because everyone just wants to be around them because they're pretty people, right? And so people who are not so good looking, they have to work a little harder on the social skills to achieve the same social conditions like friends and upward mobility and all that.
A lot of comedians aren't necessarily the handsomest people out there, but
yeah, exactly. They have to be funny because otherwise, why would you want to look at them?
So is the argument that we should not try to resolve all these disputes and just encourage? Is this like the Joker philosophy of just spread chaos in order to? Actually, he's not spreading chaos in order to help people, but you could make an argument there almost that spread chaos in order to help. I should neglect my children because it will make them stronger in the end.
I've heard that argument before.
Yeah. Well, it's true. I mean, as a parent, you have to find a balance between doing too much for them and not doing enough. Like, you don't want to just do everything for them. You want to give them the tools to help themselves. On the other hand, you don't want to it's not just, hey, you're on your own, kid.
Yeah. As it is, I think kids actually go through a lot of struggle as it is in our modern society. There's like quite a bit of teen suicides that take place that we could hopefully try to resolve so that there isn't as much struggle for young children going through.
I would argue a lot of the suicide is because not enough struggle. Because in the old days, a lot of people had to get along with people in much more hostile social conditions than currently. These days, people are basically all like, oh, I feel bad. It's like, yes, but if you live back 100 years, feeling bad is normal. So
I think what's necessary is like having a model of others that have been able to overcome struggle, and then so that they can like see that, oh, other people have done this. Like, that's probably my, I guess, thesis on it, is the fact that they don't have models for people that have been in the same circumstances as themselves and have managed to get out of it and be able to live happily with it. And so they don't have somebody that they can turn to and emulate.
Well, have you heard of the bulldozer parents who it's the idea of they push all of the obstacles out of the way for the child. So when the children actually end up with an obstacle and the parent can't help them, the child has zero experience with this. And it's
well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, you need a balance between doing everything for them and not doing enough. Like when I help my kids with my homework, I always say, I'll help you do it, but I'm not doing it for you. I'll if I don't see them trying, then I just say, okay, well, you tell me when you're ready to try, and if I see them trying, then I step in. But if I don't see them trying at all, then I just stay back. So it's a balance, and finding the optimal balance is tough. I mean, sometimes I know I just give in because out of expedience, I'm like, I'm tired. Okay, let me just correct this for you. And because it takes a lot more time to have them struggle through it. So
I think it'd be really interesting to try like a thing with a pet, maybe like, okay, you little bastard, I feed you all the time. You didn't have to hunt for this, so I'm going to emulate hunting. I'm going to hide this somewhere in the house. If you find it, then I'll give it to you. But otherwise, too bad.
Well, it's like I'm on a stream right now, and my kids, if they're a little hungry during the stream, they have to go make themselves a snack. And I've said, unless there's an emergency, come in. Now they can still come in for an emergency. I'm not saying never come in, but they're old enough to fend for themselves. Like, they're not going to starve if they don't see me for 2 hours while I'm on a stream.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of like the goal, is to make people so that they're more capable of living within their circumstances, and actually making them more capable of being able to live in circumstances that exceed their current circumstances. But,
yeah, for sure.
all right.
So, bringing this back. I mean, I don't know. He just brings in this thing about caring at the end. I don't know if we wanted to talk about that.
I had mentioned it a little bit, like how our rationality or general cognition kind of rests upon our finding things salient. And
but was he equating caring with salience? Is that all he meant? Caring, meaning we care about it in terms of attention, or he didn't mean caring in terms of emotion, or he just meant caring, meaning we think it's important? Is that?
Yeah, I think just in terms of importance, it may be that like you don't have like, I don't think he's meaning like empathetic care towards a thing.
Okay.
But just the reason I'm solving this math problem is because it relates to my taxes, and so I don't want to get my taxes wrong and so on from there.
Right. Okay. No, that makes sense.
All right. Yeah, I think we'll wrap it up here. I know it is a little bit shorter, but these two lectures were very much more technical and probably not as interesting for our audience to go into in more detail. But
if people want a longer discussion, they can check out John Buck and my's discussion about free will on my channel at Pleasure of Doubt on YouTube, which has 33 views so far. So
nice.
Anybody watching this would be happy to have them come and give a few more views. I think we're planning a follow-up. Do we nail it down? We're gonna have a follow-up free will discussion with.
Isn't that like real soon? I heard backroom talk about the next conversation.
Yeah, I think I don't know if we did we nail it down?
I think it's for tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, I didn't know if it was nailed. So tomorrow on my channel, we'll have a follow-up discussion on free will. So that
looking forward to it.
that'll be good, and I think I'll be fully over my stomach flu, so
okay,
I'll be more engaged as well.
All right. So yeah, thanks everybody for watching us. Thanks Flying Voxel Noland for participating in chat. And yeah,
thanks for stopping by.
And yeah, so we'll be probably doing episode 33, 34, and maybe 35 Vervaeke's lectures for next week. So
now, where do we fall in the holidays? Are we?
Maybe we'll take a break. I don't know. We'll probably discuss it in the Discord, which is down below. And also, we usually have, or we'll sometimes have discussions.
I'm good for it, but okay. I don't know what you guys.
Yeah, it might depend on everybody else. Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.